Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Okay, so this episode, The Grasp of the Gnome, is actually one of the few episodes I remember watching when this was actually airing, but yeah, I do kind of like this episode still. It is very interesting, and it's definitely one of the episodes that this is one of the episodes that made me wish I had watched it when it was actually airing. But yeah, this episode is kind of interesting in how it works, and this episode does continue onward with its whole continuity thing, with a couple of things repeating from the previous episode, and yeah, this episode also kind of reaffirms like Velma's feelings about Shaggy and a whole bunch of other things. But yeah, the episode actually opens up with Ben and Jen, who are at the Renaissance Fair that Crystal Cove puts on every year, and Jen is actually wearing a traditional, medieval outfit, whereas Ben shows up wearing a pirate outfit, and which obviously Jen has mixed feelings about, because as she points out, it doesn't feel very historically accurate at all, and also points out that she feels like that it would be a bit problematic for him to be wearing a pirate costume, but he merely points out that knights and stuff are boring, and that's what the whole reason he actually wound up wearing the pirate costume in the first place, and decided to start putting on the costume and start wearing it. So that they would just be a little bit more interesting, because obviously dressing as pirates just makes things more fun. And I can't really say I disagree with him, but at the same time, historical accuracy is kind of important at these fairs. But in any case, after pointing out a spiel about pirates, he then proceeds to get dressed. He then notices that his sash on his costume is coming off and goes into the alleyway to actually adjust it. At which point, he is actually attacked by the titular gnome, which the gnome is kind of cool. And here's why, because it actually winds up confronting Ben and winds up paralyzing him with a touch, which causes him to become immobilized. At which point, Jen comes in to investigate, pointing out that she could have made him a sash in the time it's taking him, but when she sees the gnome attacking her boyfriend, she merely panics and is concerned that the gnome is going to corner her as well. But then the gnome just kind of acrobatics out of the alleyway and pieces out. He leaves her alone completely, which is interesting. But in any case, by the time the Mystery Inc. gang actually wind up going to the they wind up going to the fair. The fair itself is actually in full swing, and it is quite an extravagant fair. They've got belly dancers. They basically went the whole 9 yards with the whole fair. The only problem is that the staff, who are actually running the fair, aren't particularly keen about pirates. As we find out, Sir Barry, who is the greeter for the fair, he's annoyed because he notes all the pirates are coming in, and he's hoping that they don't ruin the fair. While Queen Amanda and her husband Gil, who is the court jester, Gil is pointing out that he hopes Sir Barry will actually relax on the whole pirate thing, pointing out that regardless of whether or not they're there, it just means more people, which means more business. But Queen Amanda merely slaps her with his cane, pointing out that obviously they need to keep everything historically accurate, and pirates being there is kind of a problem. So obviously, just pirate people just showing up in pirate cosplay is just a really big problem. And yeah, this actually winds up being relevant to the plot of the episode, because Scooby and Shaggy, as it turns out, are dressed up as pirates to go to the festival. And they are just really committing to the bit. They're very much they very much practice their pirate slang, and are very much openly talking like pirates as they interact and think about all the various food stalls they can go to. And when Velma sals up to Shaggy and asks if she can quote unquote dock, he merely points out that yes, if she is indeed as he puts it, a serving wench who will wear fair clothes. But and with that, he just leaves. At which point, she immediately points out that there's no way in hell she's wearing those kinds of costumes. But she's, as it turns out, she's the only member of the Mystery Inc. not wearing a costume, because Fred and Daphne are actually wearing somewhat matching medieval clothes. They actually show up and are dressed together and are actually they're actually happy to check out all the stalls as well. Fred in particular is happy to check out the man traps and a bunch of other things a bunch of other medieval traps that he doesn't fully understand, but he's trying to look around and try to think them. And at which point, Daphne stops him and asks him what he thinks of her outfit, which is a very cute outfit. I will admit that, but he doesn't even know how to respond to that question, so he just kind of leaves. They just kind of leave. It's at this point while they're actually going around the stalls that they actually see Jen giving a police report, and Ben is being hauled off in an ambulance. Which winds up they realize they need to actually go and look into, and proceed to talk to Sheriff Stone and let him and ask him what's going on, and Jen is hysterical. She's just pointing out everything she saw about the whole incident, and very obvious, and not so obviously, this is a very much a thing in the episode, but Sheriff Stone just very much just scribbles nuts in the top of his notepad, and then just closes it and remarks that he'll see what he can do. At which point Mr. Ink asks him what's going on, and he merely points out that there was a gnome attack, which obviously Fred is very confused about, pointing out that gnomes are the little things that are supposed to protect your gardens, and Fred Jones Sr. actually is with Sheriff Stone, and he actually remarks that normally, yes, they would protect your gardens, but in this particular instance, it's a violent gnome that's attacking people, and he merely remarks that that's good for business, and remarks that he hopes that Fred should very much stay out of it, and Sheriff Stone just reaffirms that statement, and then they both leave. At which point they decide that they actually do need to start looking into it, and the first thing they actually try is to talk to Jen, and they actually wind up sitting down. They actually get some, what was it? So, yeah, Skipper Shelton's in this episode again, and he's made cotton candy for the fair, but obviously he's a clam guy, so he made clam, I don't know how to describe it, but he made clam flavored cotton candy. I don't know how he did that or how that makes sense, but he somehow managed to make cotton candy that tastes like clams. I don't fully understand that myself, but it's interesting. But in any case, they're actually talking. But in any case, they start talking to Jen to try and get information, and Jen merely remarks that the gnome just attacked Ben and left, and she was very much concerned about how she could have been attacked as well, but for whatever reason, it decided not to. And then to actually calm her nerves, she actually takes a bite of some of the cotton candy, but remarks that's actually kind of awful. And also Velma even points out something strange about the gnome, which is that it has a paralysis ability, which she remarks doesn't sound like a gnome power, like, at all. So she's very much concerned that there might be something else going on with the gnome, and decide to actually go and investigate, while Scooby and Shaggy decide to just help themselves to Jen's cotton candy, since she obviously doesn't want any of the clam flavored cotton candy that Skipper Shelton has somehow managed to make. That sounds disgusting, and apparently it is, but yeah. At which point Velma actually decides that she can actually wind up going to talk to her mother about it, pointing out that she's actually running the souvenir stall and that she may know something. And Scooby and Shaggy happily tag along because they point out that that's right next to the cotton can the moat. There's some sort of moat that's used as a serving thing, and I don't fully understand how that works, but they decide to actually go and investigate since it's right there, and Velma actually just winds up getting annoyed, but she decides to go and investigate as well, while Fred and Daphne actually decide to actually go off and go investigate their own thing. And during this, we actually do see Shaggy and Scooby actually drinking from the moat. Right, Velma merely being annoyed about the whole ordeal, and she actually talks about it a bit with her mom, pointing out that She very much cares about Shaggy, and she hopes that he'll reciprocate her feelings. Mrs. Dinkley merely reassures Velma, pointing out that that she's a very pleasant girl when she isn't trying to be smarter than everybody, and that and then eventually he will indeed turn around and reveal how he truly feels about her. But for the time being, she just needs to kind of let it go and not worry about it, and that in time it'll wind up working out. But in the meantime, she actually pulls out a magazine that has a bunch of info about gnomes. And what we find, and tells Velma to take a look into it to actually make sure she has all the information she needs on gnomes. So, and while Velma isn't entirely sure how accurate it is, she does point out that it is helpful information nonetheless on what the gnome actually is, and decides to actually thank her mom for it and proceeds to start looking through it. And it's at this point where she's actually started looking through it again. But while she's actually doing that, we actually find out that two more pirate nerds actually wind up leaving the fair and are immediately attacked by the gnome in the parking lot. So the gnome starts sleeping all over the place. So the gnome is sleeping all over the place, and very much, I haven't described this yet, but it's a very skilled acrobat. It's very skilled at jumping all over the place and just kind of leaping from place to place almost effortlessly. Which only adds to how hard it is to actually evade this thing. But the pirate gnomes actually try to run from it, and they keep getting attacked, and they keep trying to avoid it, and eventually they do wind up making it back to their car. But one of the guys actually winds up dropping his keys, and winds up getting attacked by the gnome anyway when he goes to pick them up, and then the gnome proceeds to corner the other guy and paralyze him as well. Which is a very notable thing. They wind up getting escorted off they wind up getting escorted off in ambulances by Sheriff Stone, who's just kind of making sure he has all the facts about the attack right. And while Velma is actually pointing out that she has been looking through the thing that her mother gave her, and remarks that while she is still dubious about the information given, she does point out that there doesn't seem to be any sort of information regarding how gnomes are able to paralyze people, which remarks that that's something that they'll have to wind up investigating. But in case, as the two guys are actually being hauled off, Daphne actually winds up noticing something in one of their hands, and proceeds to get closer and investigate, and actually discovers a missing earring and brings it back to the gang to show them. With them pointing out, and Fred points out that that's actually a very perfect lead, pointing out that they'll have to actually investigate that again. But meanwhile, Gil and Queen Amanda actually show up and start talking about it again, and Gil remarks that this seems very bad for business, and that if they don't do something soon, this will actually cause problems. But Queen Amanda merely bonks them on the head again with her staff, pointing out that it's probably fine since they're only attacking the pirates, and that for the time being they could just kind of go about their business and hope it's fine. Which Daphne does note is a little bit suspicious, pointing out that obviously if they're only attacking pirates, that's a very suspicious thing, and that is something I noticed when watching this episode as well. In the beginning of the episode, it was almost exclusively attacking pirates, but Shaggy and Scooby remark that they're not very worried about it, and that they should just keep investigating the fair as best as they can, and just keep going from stall to stall and keep looking through the fair. But at which point Velma remarks that for their sake, she's hoping that the whole being attacking pirates thing is indeed not actually a thing. Since obviously Scooby and Shaggy are dressed up as pirates is a big problem if they get attacked. But as it turns out, it is indeed a thing, because we actually see this part of the episode is actually followed by a montage where we see the gnome attack several other patrons at the fair, and they're all dressed up as pirates. And he seems to just be attacking pirates in general indiscriminately, which does wind up causing a bit of problems. But in case Scooby, the rest of the gang actually winds up, after seeing all of this, decide to actually start investigating what's actually happening to all these people, and their search actually winds up taking them to the movie theater, where Sheriff Stone has since turned the place into a quarantine zone. and remarks that obviously they need to actually continue investigating and hoping and just kind of keep them still. And when the rest of the gang when the gang actually goes to ask Sheriff some questions, he merely rebukes their questions by pointing out that it's a quarantine zone and that they're not allowed in, and also more to the point, remarks that the movie's already started. Which Scooby in particular takes a bit of an interesting little thing towards, pointing out that that seems a little bit strange. But Sheriff Stone merely reassures them that he's seen the movie they're airing, and he points out that being magically paralyzed is the perfect state to watch the movie, implying that the movie is actually quite terrible, and they're not missing much. But in any case, he then proceeds to leave to go fill out a police report. At which point, the gang actually decides to actually sneak in and go investigate what's actually causing the pirates to become paralyzed. Extend Scooby and Shaggy decide to actually raid the snack bar and go look for snacks. Which Velma is kind of annoyed at that, but the three of them actually wind up going in, and with Fred actually revealing that he actually brought some tools with him to actually go and investigate. And what we find out is that the movie kind of relates a little bit too well to Velma's personal problem, which is that the guy in the movie. This is a kind of a very funny thing, but the guy in the movie loves his dog more than he loves his wife or girlfriend or whoever in the movie, and Velma merely remarks that she knows how that feels, which is very funny. But in any case, Fred eventually finds a good victim to actually go and use his extraction tool on, and proceeds to give the girl several minutes alone so that he can go and extract whatever it is that's causing the paralysis. At which point, Daphne notes that something about Velma seems off, and Velma merely points out that she's been dating Shaggy, and which Daphne initially takes as a good thing until she points out until she notes that Velma is still very sad despite that, and Velma merely points out that she's kind of caught in a circle with Shaggy. As she points out, she loves him. He does something stupid. She regrets loving him. Then she sees him again, and then she falls in love with him all over again. And then he does something stupid. So yeah, she's kind of just stuck in this big circular loop. And points out that she's a little worried about if her feelings are actually being reciprocated. And Daphne just kind of reassures her, ish. Pointing out that he feels bad, that she does feel bad about how Shaggy is actually not reciprocating her feelings, and also points out that she knows exactly how she feels. But when Fred actually comes back, Daphne actually winds up cluing him in with Velma's permission, and tells him what's going on with Velma, and Fred isn't really the best at relationship advice. We've established this, but he just kind of reassures her that she's complicating things a little bit too much, and points out that they have the rest of their lives to actually work out any sort of problems between them. So, and points out that the friendship they have will eventually work itself out. So for the time being, she just kind of needs to relax and hope things will work. Just let things work out. But in the meantime, he actually has a plastic baggie full of goo that he extracted from one of the paralyzed people, and he proceeds to point out that now they just need to investigate and figure out where the paralysis problem is coming up from. And it's at this point where Velma actually puts her big brain to use, while Scooby and Shaggy are actually snacking down on their junk food. And what we find out is that the paralysis effect that the gnome has is actually a jellyfish toxin. As we find out, he's been using the gnome is using jellyfish toxin to paralyze people, which is interesting. But notes that the paralysis effect isn't permanent, and that it'll eventually wear off after a few days. Which Shaggy does actually point out is just long enough for the fair to be over. Which winds up striking the rest of the gang as odd and a little bit of a weird coincidence. So yeah, Shaggy actually winds up contributing to the episode by pointing out that the fair will be over in a couple of days, which is an interesting detail, because that's how long the toxin actually paralyzes people for. At which point the gang kind of realizes that whoever is using the jellyfish toxin clearly has a vendetta against the pirates, and is using the guys of the gnome to keep them out of the fair. So clearly, so now the gang actually having a lead to investigate decides to actually go and look around for the gnome and make sure nothing's going on, and they actually wind up splitting up. Fred, Daphne, and Velma actually wind up splitting up to go investigate the gnome and look into it a little bit more. While Shaggy and Scooby go off to go do their own independent investigation, which is in actuality they're just using as an excuse to go raid all the food stalls again. But while they are doing that, in the process, they actually wind up finding out a little bit of information, which is that Sir Barry used to actually they actually wind up walking in on a conversation between Gil and Sir Barry. But what they find out is Sir Barry used to run the medieval show that they run every year, but and that he didn't abide pirates back when he was in charge, but. Gil merely points out that he ran it into the ground and remarks that regardless of what he thinks, Gil is still very much in charge, because as we find out, he did wind up marrying the rich and powerful Queen Amanda to actually run the show. But it's at this point where Sir Barry merely remarks that he wonders if Gil will actually remain in charge for much longer. And with that, he just kind of leaves. At which point, Scooby and Shaggy decide to actually investigate that further and follows the two men into the back of the stall, where they actually wind up looking through a window. And what they find out in the back of the window on the castle is that they initially believe that Sir Barry is the gnome because they see him take out a costume. But then after watching for a little bit longer, they discover that no, he couldn't be the actual culprit behind the gnome, because he himself is in fact a secret pirate and enjoys wearing pirate costumes despite knowing that they're historically inaccurate. So yeah, they find out. So yeah, they can't unsee that, and they even remark as much. But that immediately narrows down who their listed suspects, since obviously Sir Barry can't be the culprit because he's a secret pirate himself and wouldn't attack other pirates. So yeah, with that they decide that he might not be the culprit after all. But they don't have much time to figure out another culprit, because right at the moment they're actually attacked by the gnome, who corners them, and the two of them actually wind up fleeing into the woods. But Shaggy quickly realizes that the gnome is going to catch him as they're running through the woods, and tells Scooby to just go save himself. And goes deep and before running into a tree and actually wind up hitting himself and dropping his little stuffed parrot that he's been having on his shoulder this whole time. But in case once he's knocked out and Scooby leaves to go and find the rest of the gang, the gnome actually winds up attacking him, and Shaggy just kind of disappears, and we don't really know what happened to him. But in any case, the rest of the gang meets up with Scooby winds up meeting up with the rest of the gang and lets them know what happened off screen. At which point they realize they need to actually kind of make Scooby feel better, but he's kind of inconsolable. He's very upset about the fact that Shaggy has been taken, and points out that he just wants in his own words, he just wants Raggy back. At which point he sees that Velma is actually coddling Shaggy's stuffed parrot, and is just kind of quietly humming nursery rhymes to herself. At which point he proceeds to actually wind up attacking the bird and tries to snatch it away from Velma, and they wind up ripping it in half. And Velma merely remarks that she misses him too, and she knows how he feels. But it's at this point where Fred actually remarks that they'll actually figure out where Shaggy is, and that they just need to look for some clues. At which point Fred winds up getting a call on his cell phone, and in a very funny visual thing, his armor winds up vibrating alongside his phone because it's made of metal and it carries that kind of sound with it. But yeah, his armor winds up vibrating in the process, which is really funny. But he winds up picking up the phone and notes that, and then discovers that it's actually Mr. E on the other end of the line. At which point he puts it on speaker so that the rest of the gang can talk to Mr. E. And Velma is understandably annoyed with Mr. E's antics and points out that she wants to know what happened to Shaggy and if he knows anything about it. But Mr. E merely remarks that he doesn't know, or at the very least can't tell where Shaggy is. He does give them a very valuable hint, which is to begin at the end. At which point he tells them to enjoy the rest of the festival and hangs up. And while nobody is entirely sure what Mr. E meant by that, eventually Velma figures it out, and and after having a temporary truce with arranging a temporary truce with Scooby, asks him to take the rest of the gang to where he last saw Shaggy. At which point, Scooby decides to actually lead them back into the wooded clearing where he last lost Shaggy, and tells them that this is where he last saw them. So the four of them proceed to split up so that they can actually find Shaggy. And eventually, Daphne quite literally stumbles across a hidden passageway, which is revealed to be inside a giant hollow tree. And after investigating after Fred goes in to actually go and save her and rescue her and scoop her up after her feet, he quickly notes that there's a ladder going up inside the rest of the tree, and the gang decides to actually investigate it. And what they discover is that unbeknownst to the rest of the fairgoers, the gnome, or whoever's in the costume, has actually built a giant network of pathways above the fairgrounds, enabling him to appear and disappear unaided. Which Fred Mueller remarks must be how the gnome keeps appearing and disappearing at will. He literally just jumps in the canopy of any nearby tree, and he just disappears off the fairgrounds because nobody can see him from the ground. As they point out, they could be hanging out as they point out in the episode, they could be hanging out up there in the scaffolding with nobody the wiser. At which point Fred remarks that now that they know how the gnome is disappearing, it's now time to set a trap for him. And with that, they then proceed to set up a bit of a pit trap with a giant grate on it, and they also cover it in sod so that it isn't entirely obvious. But then they remark how they're actually going to lure the gnome into the trap, and they decide to use Scooby, since Scooby is obviously dressed up as a pirate, and the gnome has been established to be attacking pirates. So they remark that Scooby is actually the perfect bait. And while Scooby has mixed feelings about it, mainly because he doesn't want to, Fred merely reassures him that they actually need that it's actually doing it for Shaggy, and tells him to let out his heartiest pirate echo. So Scooby does. He shouts out his pirate catchphrase, which is just a variation of his main catchphrase. But he winds up shouting it out to attract the gnome, and the gnome actually winds up coming, and the rest of the gang just decide to hide in a tree, with Daphne following in close behind, with Velma Mueller remarking she said something about needing bracelets. But they actually wind up hiding in the hollow tree with Scooby actually lowering the gnome into a trap. But it works up until the gnome sees Mr. Ink hiding inside his hollow tree hideaway, and decides to make a break for it by running back into the scaffolding up above the fairgrounds. At which point they decide to actually follow him up into the tree, and they proceed to actually chase him down and try and corner him. And eventually, Scooby does eventually wind up finding Shaggy after some investigation and looking around the tree, and does eventually find Shaggy just tied up in the branches, and cuts him down and lets him out. But in the process, and I'm not entirely sure why this happens, but in the process, they actually wind up breaking the scaffolding they're sitting on, and they wind up falling into Fred's trap, with Sir Barry actually wind up seeing them, and he chews them out for being on the fairgrounds. Meanwhile, the rest of the gang actually winds up chasing after the gnome. And Fred uses his ascot to actually use the tree branches to actually corner the gnome. And the gnome tries to actually make a way out by actually attacking Daphne. But then it's revealed that his paralysis touch actually doesn't work, and he winds up fleeing into the fairgrounds. At which point we find out why. As it turns out, Daphne's bracelets are made out of steel, and in a very smart thing that she does, she actually winds up putting on the steel bracelets so that when the gnome tries to paralyze her, it just winds up not working because she's wearing protective armor underneath her medieval dress. But with that, they actually wind up chasing the gnome around the fairgrounds, and Scooby and Shaggy, after recovering from their fall into the pit, actually help the rest of Mystery Inc. actually corner the gnome, and the gnome is just leaping around trying to get away from them and trying to evade them, and eventually it winds up smashing into a pile of barrels, which it then uses to try and flee. It actually winds up running on top of the barrel and tries to flee, but in the process, the gnome actually winds up running over Sir Barry and lands into the pit with Sir Barry in tow. At which point, Fred and the rest of the gang actually wind up cornering the gnome, and Fred quickly ties the gnome up and pulls him out of the pit. And it's at this point where the police have actually been informed about what's going on, and Sheriff Stone alongside Mayor Jones and Queen Amanda actually show up to investigate, and it's at this point where Fred actually unmasks him to discover that the gnome is actually Gil. Which is very interesting, but obviously everybody is a little confused, but Queen Amanda recognizes him immediately and points out that his last name is actually Littlefoot, Gil Littlefoot. That's his full name. And Velma is actually very confused, pointing out that he's too tall to be the gnome. The gnome is established to be very, very short and tiny. So they remark that he couldn't possibly be the gnome, but he merely remarks that it was actually a very easy ruse for him to pull off, and then proceeds to explain why his family name is called Littlefoot. At which point he climbs out of the costume, and it's revealed that Gil Littlefoot is actually a very short little man. As it turns out, as he explains, he actually wears fake legs to kind of pretend to be taller than he actually is. And he points out that he actually put a secret what is it called? His secret condition to good use by dressing up as the gnome, since obviously nobody would suspect somebody who's supposed to be tall, who is actually short. And then he reveals that what he was actually trying to do was frame his wife Amanda because he wants her fortune to take over the fair permanently. So yeah, he wants to just kind of be completely in charge of the fair, and to do that, he disguises himself as the gnome, who has been established to be attacking pirates indiscriminately, and obviously Amanda has a very known hatred of pirates. But in addition to that, he was also the one who planted the earring, since he knew that it would be quickly found out that it was Queen Amanda's. And obviously, once Mr. Ink started investigating, they would eventually figure it out. But they eventually just didn't quit. Obviously Mr. Ink didn't quit, and eventually did wind up catching him. And he winds up uttering that they would have gotten away with it if it weren't for those no good meddling, gnome hating, pirate loving. And then Sheriff Stone actually winds up cutting him off and arrests him. At which point they proceed to actually go off to join the rest of the fair, and Queen Amanda then proceeds to thank Mr. Ink for actually catching her husband in the act, and proceeds to resume the fair as planned. But this time, now the pirates are actually able to actually join in on the fun. And now with everything solved and wrapped up, Scooby and Shaggy proceed to actually go off and go investigate the fair, go and explore the fair to their full content. With Fred actually wind up joining them because he actually has a couple of traps that he hadn't hit up yet. Velma is very sad about it, and sad about the fact that she's still being chopped liver by Scooby and by Shaggy, but Daphne merely reassures her that it will be fine, and that eventually she will be in a position where Shaggy will eventually appreciate who she is, and that she hopes that she and Fred will be the same way as well. At which point she leaves to go throw peanuts at the peasants and tells Fred to wait up for her. It is at this point where Velma is kind of just trying to think through her feelings for Shaggy, when she's suddenly bumped into by an executioner character that I haven't really talked about, but he's just kind of been milling around the episode and doesn't really play an important role until the very end. But he winds up bumping into. In any case, the executioner winds up bumping into Velma and walks off, with Velma merely calling him a series of names and yelling at him to watch where he's going. At which point she notes that he actually dropped some sort of box in the ground, and tells him that to come back and pick it up. But by that point, he's just long gone. And after investigating the box a little bit further, discovers Mr. E's seal on the front, and realizing it's likely for her, she decides to actually open it up, and she finds a handwritten note from Mr. E telling her not to despair and that it's happened before. But in any case, when she doesn't fully understand, she actually winds up pulling out a picture, and what we find out is that she actually finds a picture of the original Mr. Ink with a picture of Professor Pericles, the group's original mascot, who is indeed name dropped in the actual episode where they're revealed, but I haven't really talked about him until now. But there's a picture of Professor Pericles circled on the notice, and Velma fully understands what Mr. E is trying to tell her, that this has happened before. She's been this has happened before, and the animal mascot has actually come in between a couple before. presumably the stand-in for whoever Velma and Shaggy were in the original group. But in case, yeah, this episode is interesting for a number of reasons. First and foremost, it just kind of continues the ongoing drama between Shaggy and Velma, and that Velma's feeling that Shaggy isn't really reciprocating her feelings all that much, and in truth, he isn't, because he's just kind of he doesn't want to. This has been established, but he does like Velma, but he doesn't want. But he's not really sure how to break the news to Scooby. So his solution to the problem is don't. So yeah, for that reason, it is very interesting in that regard. But more to the point, that Gnome is just a really cool villain. I just really like him as a villain. His entire motivation of I'm going to frame the person in charge so I can be in charge is kind of but I do like the Gnome as a villain, because he's just fun. He's just jumping around places, and he's a very acrobatic character. But yeah, I do like the Gnome as a villain. And obviously Gil's entire motivation of I want to run the thing for money, and I don't really care about historical inaccuracies, is obviously a very big thing of his character. And it does wind up playing into the actual episode, because he winds up trying to frame his wife over it. So yeah, it is a very interesting episode. I mean, the motivation is kind of doesn't sort of make sense, but I mean, it is an interesting episode nonetheless, and I do like it. And once again, we have a thing of where Fred Jones Sr. is very much in the way of his son, trying to make sure that they don't investigate things, because he wants more tourist attractions. And that is a recurring thing of this character. That's the only reason why he doesn't want Fred investigating all of these mysteries. He doesn't want his son investigating all of these mysteries because they're bad for business. He just wants all of these mythological creatures to be real. He just wants them to be hanging around and causing problems, and doesn't really care about the end goal consequences of the fact that they may wind up hurting some potential voters. So yeah, obviously that's yet another thing. Fred Jones Sr. is very much unconcerned, and that seems interesting as well. I've talked about it before, but he seems just generally unconcerned with the fact that these mythological creatures possibly are just hanging around town and causing problems, and he doesn't really give a crap. But in any case, yeah, that's gonna do it for my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon if you want to help support the show. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks, and I'm always saying thanks. So just yeah, be sure to go check those out. Link is down in the description. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video I recommend to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, we'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!